Hey geeks, welcome back to the series of videos on all about JWT. We are currently understanding the second article on this series of JWT, understanding JWT. We have so far understood till the concept summary what we are going to build in the node server, and let's try to understand now the npm packages used in our backend. So for that, we'll first try to understand this. Where is our code? Yeah. So we have already set up our server is running. We are already done with the setup on DB in previous video. Now let's try to understand the packages used. So the packages used are nothing but these are just few dependency we have. Bcrypt, basically Bcrypt we have, if you see our examples here, Bcrypt, this one is used just for hashing the password. So the password inside database, we should not be storing the whatever user has given the password as it is, because it's not secure and it's not best practice to follow, because anyone can see then password of anyone's, which is not good. So we encrypt that password using this bcrypt library, and then we store them. And when we try to match the password with when user is trying to log in, we need to decrypt that password. I forgot that whether we encrypt the incoming password and then match with the database, or we decrypt from the database. We'll see. But anyway, we use this library for encrypting the password and then storing it. Okay, body parser. Let's try to check what it is written here. So it's like we already know that what we are going to follow. So body parser is basically we are using it for incoming request, whatever comes in bodies in a middleware before you handle it. So whatever comes in the body in any request on any endpoint, we need to parse it. Without parsing it, we won't be able to access that body, right? For that, we are using body parser library. No more difficult explanation we need. Okay, alright. That's the simple way. Now let's understand the third one, cookie parser. If you know that we are using cookie for storing our refresh token inside browser, the reason is we don't want to store it in our database because we don't want to maintain that. We have already explained in detail why. And another reason is like we don't want this cookie to be accessible in front-end script. So this is just for browser. Browser will be sending this cookies to the server, but before that it needs to be saved. So generating cookie and setting it to the browser, we are going to use this library for that in the node server. Now .env, it's like, just if you see this .env file we are using, right, just to utilize the functionality that we have some environment variable created in our local, which we are not going to push so anywhere else. That's where we are using this .env. All right, then Express, of course you know that node server is having a very popular framework utilized by a lot of developers, is the Express framework. So I'm using that as well for organizing the endpoints smoothly without any hassle. Now JSON Web Token, this is the library which will utilize to generate the JWT token. Morgan, let's try to understand. Basically this is for a logging purpose. Let's try to see what it is written here. Morgan is just a logger middleware for Node, helps in debugging. So it's a best way to log. There are a lot of options you will find if you search the Morgan library in, on Google or anywhere else search engine. You will get a lot of options to log your request coming from different end users to your server and organize accordingly. So I find this is a beautiful tool. So yeah, just for logging purpose you are using it. Coming to the last one, PG. We are using Postgres database. So Postgres database, for implementation and utilization of that, connecting this node server to our Postgres database, which we have already created inside this, where I can say is, yeah, this one. If you check, this is a Postgres SQL we are using. This we are going to connect to the node server. For that, we need PG, any library, and that library is PG library. Okay, so what I'm going to do is here, yeah. So I think we are done with the dependency, and this node mon I have already explained that this is just for restarting the server each time we do any changes in our node application, so that we don't need to manually restart the server whenever we change something. That's the dependency. So I think we are good on this. So let's try to move forward quickly. So our backend folder structure looks like this. So if you expand these all folders, you will see the image something like this. Here in this image, two files are missing. One is the SQL, which I have included in the node GitHub repository, and here I have given the database query which we have already used to create the database. Please follow the previous video to understand this better. I want to repeat this one right now. Now another file we are missing here is readme file. It is not there. I will make sure that I will replace this image, but even if I don't think this will be a big deal. So yeah, anyway, this video is there, right? Yeah. So let's move forward here. Let's try to understand the root folder. What are the root folders here? So the concept is like, we have already a server, all codes are already written, but we are just trying to understand the each file written, and when we reach to the JWT implementation, we will give a good amount of time to understand it. That's the idea. Sorry. Human things, yeah. So this is our entry point file. This is the one file where everything started in the everything starts from in the server. So here we are saying that, hey man, please run this server at this 4000 port of this system. Then we are just using the create server function to create the server. You are already aware on that because I assume that you know how node server works, and we are just giving a log that this server is running on this port. And if you go to the main file of this root, is this app.js. So before going to that, I think we will go in detail in this file, but this is just the file which we can say is like, here we are parsing the request using middleware and routing. So this is a summary, like we're importing some library and parsing the request coming to the server, and then accordingly we are routing it to the routes. That's the thing which we are doing. Let's jump to understanding the other file. Now .env file, you know, this is the file where we are keeping the database secrets, or not secrets only, the credentials as well, and the secrets of our JWT here. Don't worry, it is not going to be pushed to the server, so this is not vulnerable to the public. Anyway, this is going to be a test. Now .env example is going to be pushed to the server. It is just example of this is a format or template which user can copy in a .env file to understand that, hey, these are the variables you need to set before starting the server. This server needs these variables, needs this data before the server can start. The way, like when you start any vehicle, you need the spark, you need the petrol. This is that for the server. Otherwise it will not start. The server will fail to start. So this will be pushed, and looking into that, you create .env file and then you give values. That's it. Coming to gitignore, yeah, for sure. This is like, we don't want to push node modules and multiple things. So if I just remove this, you will see that 1k plus data is going to be pushed to the server, which we don't want, because these node modules are just for system, not as this library which we are using. Sorry about the glitch. Oops, again. So this get ignore file is just for ignoring those things which we don't necessarily require for making it available to the repository, because this can be installed by anyone by doing this npmi. So, and it's a huge, so we should not be. And .env, of course, .env is the file where we are keeping the secrets or database credentials in the system, so it need not to be pushed, so that's why we are ignoring .env as well. Coming to package.json and package log.json, we know already that package.json are just for keeping a record of what are the packages are required to run the server. We have already went through this all. Coming to the log file is the one which keeps the versions locked for this whatever the packages you are using. So locking the dependency version installed. So whatever installation is done, that installation version will be locked here. So that's all about this. Coming to the config and API. Config, what is config? If you see the config folder, this is just the configuration thing. We are just keeping some configuration here. So if you remember, we have used a what's that? I just remember it. .env library. That library is helping us to read this .env file and then provide this using process.env inside this object, so that we can utilize this DB configuration, and that DB configuration will be utilized inside the code to connect this server with database. I hope you understood that. These are the basics, so I won't go in detail. I keep repeating this because this is not tutorial about database or Node or React, anything. Awesome. Coming to the next part, so where we were now, API. API is the very main code are inside this API folder. This API folder is nothing but written all the basics code, what should be the code getting executed when an endpoint is hit. So we will understand those things, how routing happens, how DB connection happen, what controller does, what middleware does. We are going to understand that. So all main source code are present inside this API folder only. Let's try to understand them in detail. So index.js we have already understood. Let's try to understand app.js in detail. As we know that index.js is the entry file, and then after that server started, this is the heart of the start of the server where everything comes to get served. Okay, so what we are doing here, we are just importing those files. We have already discussed these libraries, what they are. So we are using them as here. So if you see, as a middleware it is getting used, and then cookie parser as well. So parsing is like, if you don't parse the incoming data, you won't be able to use it in your request. So it's a mandatory thing to parse. Otherwise you will have to parse it by writing yourself. That everything should not, we need not to be reinvented again and again, right? So that's why we are using the libraries to parse the datas here, or datas, okay, to parse the data here, and then we are just utilizing this course concept here. So before I go to this part, I just want to give you guys the heads up is like, if you don't have the much idea on what is course and why it exists even, then I have written an article on that as well. So if you search if you simply search my website, just Google it, javadinfinite.com. Then, okay, let me just Google it if it comes directly in Google or not. Oops, lot of people, I don't know why these photos exist, but this name is me for sure. So I click this, then you will go to article section, and if you see, this is the course article I have written. If you click this, you will be reaching there. Here I have explained what is course, and everything you need to know about course is there, so I won't be repeating that, just the heads up. Now let's try to jump to code again. Here we are saying that, hey, whenever a request comes, this one is we are setting. So there is a calls library also present. We can utilize that, but since it's a very small thing for me, so I just written this, not reinventing the wheel, but just a few lines of code to tackle the calls thing. So this will also give you some insight to you guys. Now this is a header we are sending in the response, so that browser will be able to understand that whether this request is valid, coming from valid sender and receiver or not. So this, if you see, we are setting the access control allow origin to HTTP localhost 3002. Now 3002 what? 3002. So just a little idea on calls is like when you have a cross-site request going on, like one site request, from one platform, you are requesting to any other platform which is not the same site but a cross-site, then cross-site happens. To understand the cross-site in detail, please go ahead and read that article. I don't want to explain that again. It will be a long video. I don't want to do that. So this cross request whenever happens, then the server needs to make sure that who are the whitelist requester to whom these requests are allowed to this server to get to serve. Right now, you can simply make it all requests to this wildcard, and your all requests coming from any source will be solved for sure. But here is a catch, I can't do that right now. The reason being is I need to make it very specific, because in front end I'm using this something called WithCredential. Now what is this all about? WithCredential, we'll understand it while writing or understanding the code in front end in the third article. But before, if you really want to go, then read it right now. I won't stop, but just be in this vibe only, na? Node server understanding. So this WithCredential is like cross-site request whenever happens, and you are sending some credentials in the request, then you have to provide this boolean value in the request. Otherwise, request won't be solved. For that reason, I had to set WithCredential in the front end. So let's say you are using a credential inside cookies to be sent to the server. In that case, you'll have to use this WithCredential as a true value, because it's a boolean variable option to be passed from the request. Sorry. This WithCredential will be set to true. If you use that, it said that you cannot pass the wildcard to this access control allow origin as a value. So you cannot put star. You will have to be specific that who are the guys, who are the requesters going to be requesting those requests with credentials. Alright guys, so we already understood this part. Now let's try to understand this one. This one needs to be set to true. This header needs to be set to true in response. If you don't give this in response of the request, then what will happen, that we are giving a response the refresh token as a token to the front end. So when we do login, as response we provide some data. In that data we also provide cookie as a response. Now we are using WithCredential option here, and if this WithCredential option are used, then we need to set this true. If we don't set this to true, which means if we don't set this credential to true, access control allow credential to true, then browser will receive the cookie for sure, but it will ignore if we don't set this to true, because we are specifically saying to ignore it. If you don't want to ignore your cookie values to be stored in browser, you have to set this to true as a header value. So I hope this is clear again. Coming to response header, this is the very minimal thing, if you guys understand it correctly, that this is allow headers. These are the content type and all. So these all will be allowed as a headers to be passed. So authorization you can pass, accept you can pass, content type you can pass. So these are for making sure that in the response we are sending some header so that browser will know that what needs to be done and what needs not to be done. So this is for browser. Okay, now option request we give, like if you understand, if you went through my article already, then you will understand that when option requests get sent to server in case of CORS concept, when option request comes to the server also needs to respond, right? That's why I have defined this, that if option request comes to the server, you need to respond with 200. So that's why I'm responding it with that. Awesome. Coming to this part, this is just any request which is coming. So this were just for setting the response. This is now for hackers. Whenever any request will be coming to the server, the request has to come, will be coming on different route, on different paths of this endpoint. Let's say local host, this server is running as localhost 4000. So on localhost 4000 it comes, then we are saying that, hey man, this route is not available. Like on base URL, we are not doing anything for now. We can set something, some documentation later on, but for now we are not doing anything. We have set a route hackers. So the base URL / hackers, if that is present, then we are sending to this route service to solve that request. Awesome. And this is just the failure. In case everything goes wrong or nothing is handled properly, it will fall to this error section and then respond. So if some code got failed, and then it will be cached here. All right, so far we understood, like any request which will be coming to the hackers path, we are going to solve that request only. So if you go to this route, we have defined the routes. What are the routes we are accepting? If you remember, we are mainly focusing on few routes, mostly 4 routes, I guess. This is the registration route. If that comes, we are going to solve via this controller. We'll come to the controller part. So router is like routing, that where this request, in which piece of code this request needs to go. That's the router part. Router is the one, you know that internet router, right? It's same thing here. Request comes to this router, and then router will decide that where this request needs to be solved. So in this case, which piece of code needs to be executed to solve that route or solve that request. So this registration is that part. So auth controller will solve here. Now login, this is the second way we are going to understand. Third one is our top number. We are going to fetch top number of hackers with this endpoint, and please ignore this. These 3 are no use. We are not doing any pagination right now, so we will ignore this right now. All is like fetching all data, which we are also not using, but this one we are using. R token is the one which we are utilizing for refreshing our access token. You remember that whenever our access token gets expired, we need to refresh that access token using refresh token. So the access token will get expired, but it will be refreshed by using refresh token. And how? That will be requested at this R token endpoint, where this request will receive the refresh token and validate it, and then respond the new fresh access token to the user. That's where this endpoint gets utilized. So we are good on this routing part, right? Let's jump to understand what is middleware. So if you see this endpoint which we are going to use for fetching the about number of hackers we are going to fetch for the front end, that requires authentication. This is a secured endpoint. If you see, this is not secure endpoint. Here we are not authenticating it. So this authenticate thing is a middleware. What is I mean by middleware? Middleware is a bridge. It works like, if you want to go from this side to this side, you will have to go through this. So if there is a bridge built to go with, where you build bridge, where you have some reason, some security, some unexpected thing can happen, where you have barrier, so you build a bridge, right? Here we are building a barrier because we want this /top number endpoint to be accessible only when user had logged in and set some credential with the request. So authentication is the bridge which helps the request that whether this guy is allowed to cross this bridge or not. What I mean by that? Hacker controller get top n hackers is a controller which is a piece of code gets executed when we request at the end /top number endpoint. That request gets served by this code for sure, but we don't want to get it served directly. We want first to authenticate the request whether this user needs to be served by this piece of code or not. For that, we are adding a middleman here, which is a bridge, which is a checkpoint, acting as a firewall, whether this request is allowed to go to that piece of code or not. That's where comes the middleware, which is right now in our case authenticate. So I hope I have explained what is middleware. Let's try to understand what is inside this middleware. This is very interesting and very important part of our backend server to understand. So if you see, this is JSON Web Token library we are using. This is library used for creating the JWT token. This is the library which is used for validating JWT token. Here, if you see, what I'm doing is I'm exporting a single file as a module export because just one export is here. I'm looking for authorization header in the request. So if a requester has authorization header in that, I'm capturing that. This is just a split part because it's a bearer token. So I'm just splitting that and then checking that, this first part, and then ultimately what I'm saying is get that token first. So I got the token. Let's say somehow see, auth header is the header. I'm just first making sure that auth header is present, and this is just a string which is looks like bearer token. So bearer space token. So if you split that with space, you will get two values in the array, and that's how we are not interested in the string bearer, we are interested in the string token. So the 0 and 1. So the second element of the array, which is 1 index, we are fetching that to token, and then we are checking whether this is existing or not. If this exists, then we are verifying it whether this JWT token sent to us is valid or not. Now there are two ways to validate. One, you remember how I said this to you guys, that when a JWT token comes, it has three parts. The first part and the second part will be utilized with the secret token. If you see, this verify function of JWT is getting used with the token you pass. It has two sections, and that two sections will be combined with this the secret code inside this server only present. Combine it and then take the output, and that output will be matched with the third part of this token, which is the signature part. If both matches, then this verify will be successful. If you don't, still confusing, go to the introductory part of the first article and a corresponding video if you want, and then understand it. But here, this is the summary. Now, token is decoded. It means that if it is verified, then of course it will be decoded, otherwise it will throw the error. Okay. Now, if this is decoded, then we are going that saying that, hey man, you go next, which means that you are allowed to cross that bridge. That's the part, right? We are saying that you are allowed. The firewall is allowing that request. So this is done. So if you see this one here, if something went wrong, some validation is wrong, it will throw error and it won't go to this piece of code. From here it will return back, where it will return back to this part of code. 500 here it will generate. No, sorry. It will generate 401 we are spawning. So if something goes wrong here, some verification failed, then this will be handled here, and we are throwing 401 if the token validation is going somehow wrong. We are handling it for two separate requirements, whether this is expired error or JSON token web error. In any case, we are sending that message, and the status code is 401, that saying that this is invalid token. If this is valid, then we are calling next. What do we mean by that? When you call next, you are saying that man, this is allowed. Next means this is the next code you are allowed to get executed and give response accordingly. That's where the next comes. Now you understood the middleware concept, right? Now let's try to understand the controller and model part of it. So I think this router is clear. Let's go to controller. So this is a controller. Controller is like, if you see the router is going after this middleware pass, router is going to this controller. Now there are different control we have defined, like after authentication or without any authentication, what piece of code to be executed to serve that particular endpoint. That piece of code is known as controller. So controller is the multiple controller we can have in a website. Each controller may have a multiple function. Each function is somehow serving the purpose to serve the endpoint. So for example, in this case, /top/number is the endpoint which will be served by this controller. So let's try to understand what is controller. So if you simply go to this, so if you see this controller folder, we have multiple controller, two controller basically. Auth is the controller. We are dealing with all piece of authentication related, like registration, login. We are going to do that here. If you see, registered is going to be to this controller and login is going to be this controller. That's the auth controller we are talking about, this one. So that is the registration and login part. This is the heart where we are generating the login. We will come to that later. Hold on, man. So hold on, guys. Oh, cool. So, I am speaking continuously. My throat is like dried. Okay. Coming to this controller hacker part here, this is another controller where we are saying what needs to be done. If you see, get top hackers is executing this function. What it means by that is like, if you serve request at that point, this piece of code will get executed, and what it is doing, it is just calling database to fetch the data. We'll come to that model part. Model is the one which is handling the database, querying the database, responding to this. So request comes to router decide where to go, which controller to go. Controller will decide which piece of code to execute, and that controller will decide that which piece of model to execute, model function to execute, and that model will communicate to the database to fetch the data. That's how the whole flow is working. So this is the controller where this is the only piece of code we are using in case of top hackers endpoint, where we are going to this model. So I have already explained what is this hacker. So auth controller we are going to understand in detail in the next video, but I don't want to explain this in detail because this is very straightforward. I would explain just one function and it will be super easy for you guys to understand any other function. Most of the time we are not utilizing those functions, so you can ignore them as well. So just this piece of code of understanding is fine with you. So if you just try to understand this, so we are when you call this controller, this will go to this model. So if you see inside model, we have multiple functions here. So model is like, one is DB connection, where we are establishing the DB connection actually. So if you see, we are just finding the git config from .env file, and accordingly we are creating a pool. Now this is a very separate topic. Please go and learn about pool concept inside database, why we should create pool in case of database, in terms what are the pool concept concept of pool in terms of database. You guys can Google it. I don't want to explain this right now. On high to just to give you a very short description on pool is like basically to not there are multiple connection can be established to the database, and some of them may be existing there and unutilized and lot of things going on. To handle multiple connections, and the number of requests are not unlimited to the database, that you cannot create unlimited connection to the database. To handle that part and to not keep any database connection idle, we use pool concept. So that's why we are creating a pool here, and this is just high level. You don't need to go inside deep. This is not JWT part, so don't need to understand this. You can ignore this totally, because this is you can do without database JWT understanding part, right? So that's fine. Now what I'm doing is simply get the pool object and check if there is error while establishing the pool connection. If not, then this function is like the ultimate one, which is like establishing the connection, and then log you will find that okay, this user is established the connection perfectly, and you return the client. That client we are using here. If you see this one, top N hackers, if I okay, this is the DB connection, right? Now if you see where we are going here in this model, so there are multiple auth model is like just handling the registration and logging part related things. So whether this username exists or not, and whether validate the user from database, that part we are handling in that DB connections and all happening, query happening in this auth model. You don't need to understand it for sure. If you want interested, you can go through them, that's fine. But DB connection we already understood. Hackers is the one which we are trying to understand. One of them is for sure we want to understand. So this one is the DB connection. So we are first establishing the DB connection using the DB connection get DB connection function, and as you saw, this responds a client. Using that client, we are querying the database that hey man, why it is man always, why not woman? I'm so wrong here, sorry about that. So here we are simply calling this querying using that DB connection, the client, and this will query that using the particular ID which you must be sending from user or the front end request. It will be coming that's ID. This ID is basically that how many number of requests, a number of top hackers you want. Let's say you want 4 hackers, then this ID will contain 4, and then 4 top hackers will be responded here, and if this is 0, then I will want to release that connection. You remember I said this pool is here. We are releasing that connection because it won't be utilized anymore. We don't want to make it idle. And just to be aware, make you sure that every time new client request won't happen, some client will be there for sure. So it's not like okay, ignore that concept. I don't want to go into that. Yeah, it will be delayed. Anyway, it's a long video. So and then after that, okay, this is 2 combined query which you guys can understand. It's not part of this video. You guys, if you want to understand, it's a very simple straightforward query. You already know the database connection and schema. You can kill it to understand it, I'm sure. So we are done with explaining the DB model as well. Now let's jump to understand what is actually happening when we talk about our authentication related stuffs like JWT creation, and that is happening here. When we do login, then everything happens about JWT, how it is handling or maintaining the verifying the concept, generating JWT, all we are going to understand in the later part of the video. So please stay tuned, don't go anywhere. The next video is going to be very exciting. So see you there. Thank you. Bye bye.